On the shelves of almost any toy or bookstore, you'll find what used to be considered just an innocent family game. A simple wooden board with ABC, 1, 2, 3, yes, no, hello, and goodbye. Said to be responsible for possessions, murders, haunted houses, and exorcisms. Welcome back to Exhumed. I'm Lisa, and this is the dark history of the Ouija board. So I'm solo again tonight. We've had a family emergency. Everything turned out fine. Sam will be back, I promise. So I'm going to do my best to tell you what I know about the Ouija board. And some of this makes me never want to touch one again. I usually love Ouija boards. I have some as Halloween decorations, and I don't think I have to tell anyone what a Ouija board looks like. At this point, I think everyone knows, but this is mine. 4 people watching, and my son actually hates it when I get that out. That's kind of a tray. I put it on my coffee table, I light a fall scented candle in it, and he hates it. He thinks I'm gonna summon a demon every time I get it out. And the more I found out about them during my research, I'm kind of thinking the same thing. So I guess let's start from the beginning. Ouija boards weren't actually created until like the 1800s, but they used other things as Ouija boards. They would call them talking boards, spirit boards, witch boards. It just came around with automatic writing and seances and all that. As far back as 1100 AD in China and ancient Greece. Now, the actual Ouija board came along during the spiritual movement in the 1800s in America. Baltimore might be the origin point. Don't quote me on that. But let's start off talking about some things that happened during the spiritual movement. This came about during, I believe, World War II, the Great Depression. There was a huge loss of life, no money, nothing to do. So since there was a huge loss of life because of the war, people were comforted in knowing that they could have seances and use talking boards to communicate with their dead family members, whether it was true or not. Some people were skeptical, of course, and some people believed, just like today. Now, the Fox sisters, they came about in 1848 in Hydesdale, New York. Maggie and Kate Fox claimed a spirit was communicating with them by knocking on furniture and walls in their home, and neighbors witnessed this. For some reason or another, they decided to move in with their sister Leah, and the activity continued. Leah decided that that was a good business opportunity, so they started making money off. So they would essentially just charge people money, and they would comfort them by making them think that they were talking to a dead relative. November of 1849, in Rochester, Corinthian Hall, they had a crowd of nearly 400 people. Then they started holding public demos in New York. Some people came because they believed. Some people thought it was fake, but they still came because they wanted to try to debunk them, and they would watch them very, very carefully. And this prompted other people to start their own medium businesses. But the Fox sisters became very famous for this. Now, because of the Fox sisters and all of these other mediums, it inspired other people to have their own seances. Mary Todd Lincoln had seances in the White House so that she could talk to her children who had passed away. She actually, if I remember right, predicted Abraham Lincoln's death. Queen Victoria, her husband, passed away in 1861, so she would hold seances in Buckingham Palace to try to communicate with him. And actually, in the Victorian era, the Ouija board was a really good way to flirt because they'd have to sit on opposite sides of the table so their legs would touch, and then they both have to touch the planchette so their hands would touch a little bit, and it was just a really innocent way to flirt. I thought that was cute. However, the Fox sisters ended up being a hoax. What they were really doing, these knocking noises that they were making, they were cracking their knuckles and their toes in different joints. They were cracking them loud enough to sound like an actual knock, and people started people started getting skeptical of them because they would watch them so closely, like when people go to magic shows and they watch very, very carefully and they can tell exactly how the trick's being done. That's what they were doing with the Fox sisters. Later on in life, one of the sisters did end up coming forward and saying, yeah, it was all fake. It was a hoax. We were faking it. Now, the invention of the actual Ouija board came about in 1890. A man named Charles Kennard noticed that seances and talking boards and everything were very, very popular, and this was a very, very good way to make some money. So he created his own. He found a man to help him make the prototype. And the first creepy thing about the Ouija board is that the prototype was made from coffin wood. He found a coffin maker, and I can't remember his last name. It doesn't matter, because as soon as the coffin maker made this prototype of the Ouija board, Kennard cut him out because greed. I'm pretty sure. So Kennard and a man named Elijah Bond and his sister-in-law went and got it patented. Before they had it patented, though, they had to name it. And the second creepy part about this is that it is believed that the board named itself. And the story behind that is that all three of them were sitting around one day trying to figure out what to name it, and they decided to play with it and ask it what its name was. And it spelled out Ouija. Now, the weird thing about that is that Ouija, if you cut it in half, it means yes in two different languages. Oui is yes in French. Ja is yes in German. Ouija also in ancient Egyptian means good luck. Now, historians think that they might have meant Ouida with a D instead. I guess that's the name of a famous writer, and it was actually etched on the back of Elijah Bond's sister-in-law's locket, but it was worn, so Kennard couldn't see it that well. And it's probably a safe bet to say that Kennard was controlling the planchette and spelled that out himself. But nevertheless, the story was that it named itself. Now, it was marketed as a parlor game, and they did get patented for it in 1891. Elijah Bond's sister-in-law took the board into the patent office and sat down with an officer and gave a demonstration, and it spelled out the patent officer's name. Now, she probably learned his name before the Ouija board session, but it was convincing enough for him to say, yep, okay, I will approve it. By the 1900s, the Ouija board outsold Monopoly. It was that popular. Almost every household had one. It was a very, very common thing for families to do. It was used daily by a variety of different people, and they would use it to predict marriage proposals, how their travels will go, business decisions, and it was just considered a harmless family game until some pretty weird shit started happening. First of all, people started reporting that the planchette on the Ouija board would move by itself. The messages would appear without anyone even touching the planchette or the board. It started predicting deaths and tragedies, and it started freaking people out a little bit, but it didn't freak them out enough to stop playing it. It was still very, very popular for a long time. Now, some stories. This one story has nothing to do really with the Ouija board. It was just a tool used to commit murder. Now, there were 3 women. 2 of them were friends. They were playing with the Ouija board one day, and the one woman told the other woman, who was a widow, convinced this woman that the 3rd woman killed her husband or was responsible for her husband's death. So they decided to kill the 3rd woman. And it was only because the first woman wanted the 3rd woman's husband. They later on pleaded guilty to murder. Now, in 1898, there was a woman named Pearl Coran who used a board with a friend. Over time, I keep moving this. Now, over time, she started channeling a spirit named Pearl Worth, and she would dictate novels, poems, and plays. There was a lot of skepticism with this. However, her voice and vocabulary changed, and she knew information that she could not possibly have known. So who knows what was going on there? Now, the spiritual movement got so big that there was actually a whole town dedicated to it. In the 1800s and early 1900s, there was, well, it's probably still there, Whitewater, Wisconsin. They called it Second Salem. And the whole town was full of spiritualists, full of people claiming to be mediums, people claiming to be witches. There were the Whitewater witches, which, by the way, I'm going to look up. And if there's enough information about them, I'm going to do an episode about them. There was Mary Worth. She came from there. If you remember our Bloody Mary episode, she is one person that Bloody Mary may have been based off of. She was in Axe Murdering Witch. I think there's a mystery behind where her grave actually is. I don't know too much about her, but we have all the time in the world to research whatever we want to research, so I might look her up too. People had seances. I guess the town is haunted, which makes me want to visit it, of course. Now, one of the weirder stories about the Ouija board is kind of crazy. Now, Kennard and Bond eventually bring in a man named Fuld into the company. Later on, they had all of these factories built to manufacture the Ouija board. And Fuld fell off the roof of one to his death. That factory in particular, Fuld previously claimed that the Ouija board told him to build that one. And that's the roof he ended up falling to his death. That's kind of creepy. Now, demonologists like Ed and Lorraine Warren warn people about using Ouija boards. First of all, the board starts out playful and then starts getting demanding. And they say, you need to be careful because you don't know who you're talking to. The Catholic Church sees the board as a form of divination, which they believe opens spiritual doors that humans cannot close. And the board breaks two ancient spiritual rules found across cultures. One is do not summon spirits without protection. Two, don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. Demonologists say the board creates a permission structure. You're inviting something to speak. And if that something lies, which demons are said to do, you won't know until it's too late. And there is one specific demon attached to the Ouija board. And this is why I will never play with one. The demon attached to the Ouija board is called Zozo. And actually, I'm going to take my Ouija board out of this room before I start talking about him. I'm not kidding. Now, Zozo is said to be a higher level demon, said to be a fallen angel or a Babylonian demon, and part of Satan's court. He's known for creating the infinity symbol. And what that means is when you're playing with the Ouija board and everyone has their fingers on the planchette, it'll start moving and it'll move in an infinity symbol over and over again across the board. If you don't know what that is, it's like a sideways 8. That's how you know you're summoning Zozo. So a smart person right away would just fold that thing up and end the session right there. And it's believed when you engage with Zozo, every future use of the board, and it doesn't even have to be the same board, you will always contact Zozo. Once you contact him once, he will always come back to you, no matter what board you're using. And any board used to contact Zozo doesn't matter. If it's the same people using the board, that board itself is tainted. It will always summon him, and he gets possessive. If you contact him, you can only contact him. He will not allow any other being to talk to you. Zozo is the only one that you will reach. Sometimes you'll think that you're talking to the person that you want to contact, but it's only Zozo pretending to be that person. Sometimes he'll pretend to be multiple people. Let's say you're using the Ouija board with a medium present, and the medium will see, as long as it's a real medium, of course, the medium will see maybe 2 or 3 people in the room, and Zozo will make it look like there's 10 people there instead, just to mess up the reading. He's also got this habit of pretending that he's a little boy who's afraid of a malevolent spirit haunting the location. But none of it's true. It's all bullshit that he's just making up to mess with you. You do not make fun of his name. If you make fun of his name, he will possess you. And sometimes people will disappear. Not for good. They'll just disappear. You won't even know that they're gone. and then they'll just like come back from somewhere and they will have absolutely no memory that they had even left the room. Now, if you continue to talk to Zozo, he will deceive you. He'll gain your trust and sympathy, only to make deals with you with the goal of taking your soul, or the soul of a loved one, or taking the soul of the person that you originally were trying to reach. There are documented encounters with this thing. A paranormal investigator named Darren Evans messes with the Ouija board a lot. He's really into finding out more about Zozo. And since these encounters, I'm pretty confident that he's not doing that anymore. And one thing about Zozo is that he's more likely to possess women, not exclusively women, but a lot of times it is women. So Darren Evans is a paranormal researcher. He had a board session on ghost adventures, actually. During this session, his girlfriend went missing. Nobody realized that she had left the room, and when she came back, her belt was undone, and she had no memory of even leaving the room. Another session in 2006, he had with his best friend, and his best friend asked the board, "How will I die?" And the board told him, "A car wreck. He'll die all alone at night." Under 1 year later, he crashed his SUV at night, died on the scene alone. Another friend Darren had this session with, he asked how he'd die. The board said murder. A few years later, his death was ruled homicide. The case was never solved. And the worst one was with Darren's own daughter. Zozo told him he would devour his daughter's soul and strike her with an iron tongue. The very day after, his daughter, 3 years old, nearly drowned in the bathtub. She was later diagnosed with MRSA, and she was hospitalized for 2 weeks in quarantine. And Darren says that she laid there with her swollen tongue hanging grotesquely from her mouth. She did recover, thankfully, and she did survive. You don't fuck with Zozo. You don't fuck with Ouija boards. Not after knowing that. Darren himself had a nervous breakdown, panic attacks, anxiety attacks. He had hallucinations that demons in human form were chasing him, and he thinks Zozo had developed an attachment to him. I think so too. Another thing that you will notice when you conjure Zozo, aside from the infinity sign, is that he will make the planchette move so fast that your hands can't keep up with it. Sometimes the planchette will fly off the board, sometimes flies across the room with such force that it'll put holes in the wall. There is an encyclopedia of demonology called the Dictionnaire Infernal. This was published in various editions in the 1800s. In this encyclopedia, Zozo is one of 3 entities who possessed a young girl in 1816. Many years before the Ouija board was created. And in an ancient language in France and Spain called Basque or Basque, I don't know, Basque, they call him the black bird or the crow. Usually when you see Zozo, it is said that he is very large, tall, completely black. And I don't mean like African American, I mean as black as my shirt. But he's got a red face, and the red face looks like he put his hand in red paint and then smeared it on his face. He's got horns, he's got hooves, he looks a lot like Baphomet, if I'm saying that right. And if you come in contact with Zozo, it is strongly suggested that you close the session immediately and cut off communication. And some might panic and burn the Ouija board. I think everybody knows, or you should know, you don't burn a Ouija board. Whatever is attached to that board is not going to go away if you burn that Ouija board. Anything, any object that is possessed, you don't burn it, you don't destroy it, because it's not going to destroy what's possessing it. What's possessing it is just going to come out, and then you run the risk of being possessed by it yourself, because it's got to go somewhere. You just destroyed its vessel. So there's no point in burning a Ouija board. Now let's go to the other side of it and say that the Ouija board is complete bullshit. Scientists talk about the idiometer effect. The idiometer effect is where your hands will be moving the Ouija board and you don't even know it. You are convinced that something else is controlling that planchette when it really is you. And you don't know. It's just your brain doing it without you even being aware of it. That to me is creepy enough, because why would your own brain do that to you? I saw a video where someone said, and I don't even know how true this is. I don't know how true anyone knows it is. But one side of your brain when you're dreaming is the side that is making up the dream. And the other side has absolutely no idea what's going on and is just freaked out as you are. Why would your brain do that to you? I don't know what's scarier. Now we're going to get into the part where the whole world decided that they were afraid of Ouija boards. And we got to start off this story talking about Roland Doe. This is probably the most famous story about a possession and exorcism in history. This was in 1949, Washington, D.C. This boy was 13 years old. His aunt was a spiritualist and taught him all kinds of things, including how to use a Ouija board. After his aunt's death, he used a Ouija board to try and contact her, and that turned out to be a bad idea. He started off hearing scratching sounds coming from the floor and the inside of the walls in his bedroom. Water would drip from pipes and down the walls, and his mattress would move. As this progressed, he started becoming physically attacked himself. He would be calm during the day, but then he would have sudden screaming fits and wild outbursts at night. And then he would enter a type of trance state, and he would make these guttural growling sounds, and he would break out in scratches and red lines all over his body. Doctors got nowhere with him because this is not medical, this is spiritual. So they brought some priests in for an exorcism. Roland was strapped to the bed. And in the middle of the exorcism, it had to be stopped because Roland managed to break out a spring from his mattress, and he slashed the priest across the shoulders with it. I think like across his back, his shoulder blades, cut him open. So the exorcism went unfinished that day. But the scratches on his body, some of them spelled out the word Louis. The family had relatives in St. Louis, so they took that as a sign that they needed to take him to St. Louis. Now, in St. Louis, 2 priests agreed to perform an exorcism with the help of other assistants. So these priests noticed the pattern. Roland would be calm during the day, and at night he would have these screaming fits and these outbursts, fall into a trance, and start growling. Objects would fly and float across the room in his presence, and sacred objects like rosaries and crucifixes and medals would make him freak out. They would affect him very negatively. Now, at one point, these red scratches that would form on him, one of them formed an X across his chest. And it's believed that that X meant that he was possessed by 10 different demons. In addition to that, a big scratch from his thigh all the way down to his ankle in the shape of a pitchfork. Now, this kept escalating, and Roland started urinating all over his bed. He started cussing out the priests, and the parents actually took him away from there and took him up to a hospital for further treatment. The morning after Easter, Roland woke up having seizures, and he yelled at the priests and said, "Satan will always be with me." So the priests laid holy relics and crucifixes and medals and rosaries and anything else sacred that they could find all over the boy. And later that night, they called on Saint Michael and said that Saint Michael was going to battle Satan for Roland's soul. 7 minutes after they summoned Saint Michael, Roland came out of his trance, and all he said was, "It's gone." And after that, he lived a normal life. That story inspired The Exorcist. And when The Exorcist came out, that is when people started fearing the Ouija board. That was the beginning of the Satanic panic. Around this time that The Exorcist came out, there were other things going on. A few years before that, Anton LaVey had just written the Satan's Bible and opened the Church of Satan. The Manson murders had just happened. The Zodiac and the Alphabet Killers were still out there. They were still active. And everyone believed that the world was being run by some kind of witchery and Satanism. And honestly, I think we're back at that point. I think this is the Satanic panic all over again. Look at Hollywood. Just saying. But the Satanic panic also brought on parental advisory. I never knew that. I thought it was just cussing. but it wasn't just cussing. They actually thought that these bands were satanic. A lot of bands that I liked. Ozzy Osbourne, of course, because why not? Judas Priest, Slayer, Guns N' Roses. I know I had a Guns N' Roses cassette tape because, yeah, I'm old. That had parental advisory on it. My mom had to buy it for me. So many bands. And I always thought it was just because of the language, but it wasn't. And after The Exorcist came out, it scared people so much that Hollywood just decided, hey, let's make more of these. And there were a ton more movies made that revolved around the Ouija board. Now, the Satanic Panic was, later 70s, all through the 80s. The 80s especially was a time of rebellion. So, of course, teenagers wanted to play with it even more. I know I did. Now, there were some miscellaneous things that happened with the Ouija board that I didn't mention before. In the 1930s, a woman stabbed her husband because the board told her he was cheating. In the 1950s, a school in California was evacuated because students claimed that there was mass possession after a Ouija board session. In the 1970s, a woman claimed that the board predicted every tragedy in her life and her death. Now, there might not be anything wrong with Ouija boards at all. It's not the object that you have to fear. You can make anything into a Ouija board. Doesn't have to be the actual board. It's not what you're using. It's not the board or object itself that you are using. It is your intention while you are using it. So my thought is just don't use one. I like them. I think they look cool. I have a few for decoration in my house. I have a blanket with the Ouija board on it that I use all the time. I have a belt buckle of the Ouija board planchette. I love them. I think they're cool. Will I ever play with one? Hell no. It doesn't matter how bad you want to believe that you can contact somebody. The Ouija board isn't a way to do it. Maybe seances aren't a way to do it either. Maybe contacting a medium isn't even the way to do it. Because like I said, it's the intention. Do I believe that you can though? Yeah. You just have to look for the signs. They're always here. They're always with you. When you're thinking about them, especially very intensely, they're there. All you have to do is be open to recognizing the signs, and it's different for everyone. So leave Ouija boards alone. That's a lot coming from me. Now, quick story. When I was younger, I did try to bring the Ouija board into the house. I borrowed it from a neighbor. And, my mom caught me right away and told me to get it out of the house. So I didn't even get to play with it. But we had this little Shih Tzu dog named Dakota. And sometime after I had taken the Ouija board in the house for a second, someone, and I can't remember who, pointed out that my dog kept suddenly just looking up at the ceiling as if there was something there. And I noticed that he was doing it. Someone said, ever since you brought that in, he's been doing that. But then we realized he needed a haircut. And it was just his hair falling in his eyes. So he would look up because he didn't know that it was his own hair. And if you haven't seen The Exorcist, I feel like it still holds up to this day. The noises that come out of that little girl, it's scarier than anything you'll watch now. It really is. It's worth watching. I guess when it came out, my dad took my mom to see it, and I don't think they got all the way through it. If I remember the story right, I don't think they got all the way through it. My dad had to take her to a well-lit place. I think they went to play putt-putt after that because it scared the shit out of her. But yeah, watch The Exorcist. It's worth watching if you haven't seen it. That's really all I have on the Ouija board for now. I do also have to announce, if you've gotten this far, this will be our last episode for a little while, for at least a couple of weeks, as we have some family things to take care of and things need to settle back down. But I will be researching my ass off. Sam will be getting her office together. So please stay subscribed and keep your eye out because we will be updating you on when we will be back. But I promise you that we will be back, and we hope you come back too. And if you haven't subscribed yet, if you like what you've heard, hit that subscribe button. And if you're watching this on YouTube, leave us a comment if you want. Tell us a story about one of your Ouija board sessions. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. Have a good night.